I spent most of my career on the customer side, actually, building AppSec programs at companies large and small, and I also spent about a year doing developer education, and I've talked to a ton of people who have a ton of different approaches to AppSec, and I find out that a lot of people end up with a problem. They build an AppSec program, and it does pretty well, but then they want to grow it, and as soon as they start to grow it, they run into problems. Things don't go very well. They can't figure out how to expand it and not spend a ton of money doing it. And it really comes down to a handful of sort of errors of thinking about an AppSec program that result from how we started with an AppSec program. And the way most of us did that is we started with compliance. Right? Whether it was some kind of regulation, SOX, HIPAA, something, or some kind of contractual obligation, or something a customer or a business partner required us to do, or even just like an internal security program that says, hey, you know, we got to start developing secure software. We made some kind of checklist, and we said, we're going to securely develop software, probably only for our critical apps, which would be anything that was on the compliance sheet. And we're gonna do certain things. Maybe we're gonna do some security testing. Maybe we're gonna have some pen tests done. Maybe we're gonna make sure that all of our developers go to security training. And that's great, right? It's a nice place to start. We get a little bit of compliance, but everybody knows that, you know, the red box up here, or the red bubble up here, is only part of the whole security solution. And so we say, okay, well, we've got compliance pretty well down, and now we're going to expand our program. So we're going to create some new policies, and we're going to scan more apps, or we're going to, you know, do more education, or basically we're just going to comply harder, right? And that'll get us further in security. And it does a little bit, but comply harder doesn't really get you there, because compliance will never get you all the way to security. And we all know it, but we all build our AppSec programs as though it's not true. Right? We all build our AppSec programs like, if I just comply harder, if I just have the right spec, if I just have the right policies, then all my applications are going to be secure, my enterprise is going to be safe, and I can go home and I won't have a job anymore. Right. And the end result is we get this kind of diminishing returns curve. If you could graph how people spend versus what they actually get, this is what you'd end up with, right? At first, the compliance program you invest in, it makes a huge difference. So you go from not terribly safe to quite a bit safer. And then it tapers off really, really quickly. And you're expanding more and more applications, but you're not getting that much more actual safety out of it. And I kind of want to focus on not the fact that it happens, because we all sort of agree that this is the problem. Right? Compliance-oriented AppSec programs don't work, but we can't figure out what to do until we figure out why compliance doesn't get us there. Yep. So this is a hypothetical graph, right? This is roughly how I see the curves go when I've actually measured it. It's kind of a free-handed. So I would love to have a huge data, and if somebody has a data set for me to actually like prove this rather than just my experience, I would love that. Please make sure you get a hold of me. So let's talk about like why doesn't it happen, and it really boils down to three major problems that I've seen in organization after organization. One is one-dimensional thinking, which is that we try to boil everything down to a KPI. We undervalue people. We treat them as an inconvenience rather than as some key component of a proper AppSec program. And then we try to build a quality control program instead of a quality assurance program and all the stuff that comes with that. Let's dig in a little bit. First here is one-dimensional thinking. All of our executives, they want to see how's their security program doing. Is it green, yellow, or red? And we know that hides a ton of stuff, so we try to do a little better. We grab BSIM or we grab OpenSAM and say, let's build a maturity program. Let's measure as many things as we can, and then we'll roll that all up into some aggregate, which will then roll into KPMs, which will then roll into this KPI. And our security program is green, and we're secure. Job done. Right? Yes? No? No. Of course not. And underlying that is two problems. The first of which is maturity is not security. It's important. It's an important component. You know, I'm not up here to crap on OpenSAM. It's a great place to start. But maturity models have some inherent problems. One is that the measurement is hugely subjective and biased. Right? You do a security model, you know, you rate yourself 1 to 5 on these various attributes. And really what you're rating is how people feel about your security program on any given day. Because you put up a description of one of the levels and you say, do you guys feel like this is the level we're at? And if everyone's feeling optimistic that day, you score really well. Or if people are feeling pressured by management to say that we're doing really well, then you're doing really well. If everyone's cynical that day, you're not doing so well. And there's no way to test it. There's no way to validate it. The closest you can get is to try to have an objective outside observer, which anybody who's done any training in the sciences knows better. There's no such thing. And so you get this bias score, and if you ask 5 people, you will get different answers. That's okay. We'll just average them together and move forward, right? That'll give us an accurate score. Maturity programs also overvalue consistency. You'll hear a lot of people describe this as management by exception, right? Someone will come along and they'll say, hey, my application is really different than the applications that all these security requirements were designed for. And I don't think I should have to do them, so I want an exception. And we may even give them the exception, but we send them the message that you had to get an exception, that makes you bad. You didn't fit into the neat little box that we defined for you, therefore, bad you, go sit in the corner. This is going to go in a report up to executives on how many exceptions we had this month. When in reality, a large number of exceptions doesn't tell you that your developers are doing something bad. They tell you that you have really poorly planned policies, right? Your policies didn't anticipate how your organization actually works. So you're measuring almost exactly the wrong thing. And that in turn fosters a false sense of security because you run this up to your CISO or to your CFO or to whomever, and you say, look, we're doing great. Our dashboard is green. We're level 3 on most things and level 4 on a couples. We're really quite mature organization for our size. We're doing a great job. And tomorrow you get breached. And everybody comes to you and says, if you were doing such a great job, why did we get breached? And then you get public statements like Target made when they got breached. But, well, we were compliant with PCI. So, I don't know. And we all know, right? We all know that there were risks in the organization. We all know they weren't managed. We all know that things hid. And part of the problem is that those aggregates that when we try to measure things, and we say, we'll just take, even real data like, oh, we'll take the number of flaws found per 1,000 lines of code. Yeah, pretty much everybody who does some kind of security testing has that as a stat that you can have. And we'll say, great, we'll just roll up the average, and we want that average to go down, and that shows us that our program is working. Yeah, kind of, but aggregates also hide all of the uniqueness in your organization, right? It smooths everything out. On the one hand, it hides real errors and weaknesses. You'll get people who, oh, I only have one real flaw in my pretty sizable application. That looks great. Except that flaw is in a subroutine that everything calls. And there's 30,000 endpoints that touch it. Right? That's actually a much bigger risk than the application over here that has 5 flaws in it, but they're only on 5 endpoints. Right? We know that internally, but we don't measure it that way. Because we take averages, we aggregate, and then we try to find problems in those aggregate scores. And the whole point of aggregating is to smooth out error. But our job isn't to smooth out errors, our job is to find it and prevent it. It also has a flip side, it hides positive effects. I've seen tons of AppSec situations where a development team who actually cares quite a bit about security, has a fair amount of security knowledge, will create a control that we didn't anticipate. I saw it when people weren't tokenizing credit cards for a long time. They were just encrypting was the only option. And people started to realize, like, hey, I can take this credit card and I can turn it into a token that still is unique but has no financial value. And this is in many ways, a superior solution, but it was a policy violating solution, so it wasn't allowed. They were still scored as being out of compliance, even though they were doing something better than the compliance baseline. Right? So their choice was either go and just encrypt stuff for no real reason, encrypting tokens that have no value, and then creating an availability risk, because heaven forbid we measure that, or to just live with this exception and look bad to their management. And those two things combine to really discourage innovation within your organization, because people aren't taking the risks that they need to take in order to do things better, because they only are going to be scored on how close they are to the average of the organization. And if they take a risk and they're a little bit below average, they're going to look bad. And if they take a risk and they're way above average, they're still going to look bad because they're out of conformance. Right? So our whole AppSec program ends up being based around conformity rather than actually trying to measure the safety of our application, the safety of our enterprise. We also make the mistake of undervaluing people. And every time I say this, I get about half the people in the room thinking, okay, I don't know what that means. And the other half going, oh God, he's going to get into feelings. To some extent, that's true. You've all seen the people, process, and technology triangle. Like every sales organization throws that up, and we go, "That's great. We have people. They're replaceable cogs. It's okay." And if they're not good enough, we'll either fire them and replace them with people who are, or we'll send them for re-education. All right, and we'll have them go through some computer-based training, which is proven to be effective. And we'll just whatever. They're people. We'll hire the right people. It'll be fine. I've never, ever, ever seen a formal AppSec program that gave more than lip service to how people actually work. First piece of that is that education is a great thing. Education is not training. Training is trying to memorize some stuff. If you ever actually watched a developer or an end user or anybody take computer-based training, there's basically two strategies. One is click through as fast as possible, take the test and hope you score well enough, and then if you don't, go back and figure out where you screwed up. Just get the right answers. The other one is wait for your coworker to do that and then give you the answer list. Because all we score them on is did you complete and did you get a high enough score? And underlying all that is, anyway, you can't memorize security. And security is not just a list of things you know. If everybody just does this thing, we'll be secure. No, it doesn't work that way. People are messy, and security is a way of thinking, and it's a process, and it's an approach, and it's an awareness of your environment. These are things you can teach, but you're not going to teach them by going, hey, your password should be longer, and we have policies, and you should really comply with them, which is really, like most training just boils down to, here's a list of things we know are good things, please do them. Please make sure you scan all your code, please make sure you do this, please make sure you do that. And nobody cares. You're interrupting people's work, and they just want to get through it and get done. Real education is a program in your organization that never stops, right? You've seen good progress toward these things. If you've seen security awareness training programs or education programs that will combine things like, yes, there'll be a training class, but there'll also be posters. There'll also be phishing tests. There'll also be occasional newsletters. It's constantly in people's minds going, hey, this is a thing you pay attention to. Hey, you had an experience with security. There was a small breach or there was a security flaw that escaped to production. Write a post-mortem and share it with your peers. Those kinds of things are education. Going to a class is the beginning, not the end. And I think part of the reason that we do that is a deeper problem, that we treat people like machines. All right? People aren't machines, they're messy. People have emotional needs. If you just give people a checklist and say, go implement software and make sure you follow this checklist, they're not going to be happy. All right? And if they're not happy, they either move on or they start ignoring your checklist because you're just an irritant. All right? We learned in the software development business, we learned a long time ago that there's no such thing as writing a perfect spec. There was this idea that if you could just specify the software precisely enough, then the coders could go code it and it would be perfect. And what we learned is that the software is specified in source code, right? No one can write a spec good enough. If the spec was good enough, you might as well just write the code. We're always learning things. It's an iterative, creative, messy process. And a lot of what we do in software development is trusting developers to go, that doesn't seem right to me. Seems like we should be doing this solution. They can't quantify it. It's experience-based. Right? If we could quantify it at that level, then we could have AI that writes software for us and we wouldn't need developers. All right? That's never going to happen, at least not in my lifetime. People also want influence over things that affect them. Nobody wants to have policies dictated from on high and feel like they have no say in the matter. And I've seen two exceptions, but everybody else that I've ever seen build an AppSec program or even a general InfoSec program, they just decide on policies with stakeholders, and all the stakeholders invariably are either managers or security people. I have only twice seen people sit down with development teams and go, hey, we were thinking about doing this, and here's our rationale behind doing this, and how is this going to affect you? And listen to what the developers have to say and come to something that everybody can agree on. Because, I mean, come on, how many of you in this room would classify themselves as a hacker, at least at some level? Anybody? Okay, a handful of you. Did you get there by following rules? Most developers I know didn't get there by following rules. Right? I mean, I describe our whole industry as the ability to know the difference between what the rule says and what the rule is. And like you're asking people who have that mindset, of just make it work and I don't care what the rule says, all I care is what I can actually accomplish, to follow an arbitrary list of rules they have no understanding of or influence over. And then we're shocked that people don't actually do it. You know, instead of sitting down and telling them the story that they need to hear, which is, hey, we have this real risk. We have a thing that we're worried about in our organization. You're worried about it too. We think this would be the solution. What do you think? Work with us. Works 100% better. And we also tend to forget that people are individuals and not averages. And this is kind of related to that one-dimensional thinking that aggregate hides uniqueness. It hides individuality too. Right? I've seen organizations, they say, okay, we're going to look at each individual application. We understand they're unique, and we're going to scan them with some kind of automated testing tool, and we're going to find out the number of flaws per 1,000 lines of code, and then we'll be great. We'll measure how well each application improves. We won't care about comparing them to each other. That's not too terrible, right? That seems like a great idea. But then we're going to score the developers on that team based on how many vulnerabilities they introduced and checked into the code. That does not work well. A, it makes people terrified to check things in. B, if you're scoring a developer on number of lines of code versus number of vulnerabilities, I can increase my line of code count really easily. I'll just stop linking libraries and I'll start cutting and pasting them. My score is going to be awesome. All right? And, people work in different ways. And when these organizations realized that this was a deeply flawed way to approach things, it wasn't working, and dug into why, it really came down to things like, A, that gameability, and B, that these people were going, but I check in more vulnerabilities because I'm working on much, much harder problems. Right? You've got me doing really, really complicated back-end code that's poorly specified, and I'm just doing the best I can, and I have to check it in and see how it goes in stage to know if I've even solved the problem. And then you're scoring me and saying, well, you're introducing vulnerabilities. Well, of course I am. I'm working on harder problems. They ended up scoring low some of their best developers. That's counterintuitive and it's counterproductive. This is somewhat related to the last area, which is building control systems instead of assurance systems. I will always argue that security, especially software security, is really about software quality. Right? Just like performance and usability and all those other things that we care about, security is just one of those quality attributes. And this is a problem that's systemic to software development, is we all say, if you guys have a decent-sized development organization, you probably have a QA department, right? And they'll say, we're doing quality assurance. Words mean things. Quality assurance and quality control were terms we borrowed from manufacturing. And quality control was where we started. We said, hey, we're tired of shipping flawed products to customers, so right before we do that, we're going to subject them to a battery of tests and make sure we're not shipping out crap. This is great. You still have big pallets of crap. The only thing you've changed is they haven't gone to your customer. In the software world, the only thing you've changed is they haven't gone to production. You've still spent all kinds of time, energy, and money making something you can't sell, something you can't ship. So manufacturing came up with this idea of, well, let's not do quality control, or at least let's not do it by itself. Let's do quality assurance. Let's not only have testing throughout the life cycle of manufacturing, but let's make sure that when we find problems, we go, okay, what was the root cause of that? Why did that happen? It's not all about the manufacturing line. It's also about, are shifts set up so that people are coming in tired and making more mistakes? Are we not automating something we should be automating? Is management failing? It's treating the whole manufacturing process as a socio-technical system where people are a big part of it, and where the process might just be flawed. It might not be that machine's out of alignment. It might be we bought the wrong machine to do that job. Right? And kind of the first principle of understanding the difference is that outcomes are not everything. Because in software development, and in IT as a whole, really, we say we're doing quality assurance, but we're not doing anything like it. All we're doing is milestones and gates and audit at the end. Right? And that compliance-oriented mindset leads itself to, well, we'll set up some gates and we'll set up an audit and we'll catch people after they've done something wrong. And assurance-oriented thinking goes, it's not that I don't care about the outcomes, it's that the outcomes come from somewhere, and I want to address those things. And the reason that's important is because outcomes have problems. Outcomes are easily gameable. There's tons of case studies on this where people have tried to change software development by focusing on outcomes. hey, you guys can't introduce so many bugs. In fact, we'll give you a bug bounty. Any bug that you find and close, we will pay the tester who found it $500 and the developer who closed it $500. And now you've created a black market for developers and QA people to talk and introduce bugs and then repair them. And you've made your organization much more efficient, and you've probably missed some bugs anyway. If you give me a statistic and you say, this is what I'm scoring you on, I'm going to do the thing that is easiest for me to do that will make that number move in the direction you want it to move. Whether or not that necessarily makes me more secure, whether or not that actually results in higher quality software. Outcomes also hide process flaws. Oh, hey, we're shipping software, we're happy with how secure the software is. But you're hiding the fact that your software costs twice as much to develop because of all the gates you put in. Right? Because you're not measuring that. You're only saying, hey, all we cared about was the light turned green at the end. Passed an audit, we found no criticals. It also leads to things like, oh, well, if we actually scan everything, then we look really bad. But if we say, well, we scanned this library once, so we don't need to scan it again. Cool. Well, as long as it doesn't change, right? And I've seen tons of times when people say, well, in the interest of efficiency, we're going to do something outside the process, and your tools can't measure it, and you don't realize that they've screwed you over. So now they've got this thing that has an exception because it's never supposed to change, but then of course it does, and you have no visibility. If your process is too onerous, if it's too expensive, if it tends to miss things, if it tends to not look for things that you should be looking for, measuring outcomes isn't going to find any of that. And all of that really results because outcomes are observed far too late in the process. Right? By the time you notice something in the pre-production environment you're pushing to production, tomorrow, oh, you have 3 high criticality bugs. If the manager says, oh, I'm not going to production with those, then their project is late and over budget. Guess what they get scored on? They get scored on outcomes too. They get scored on shipping on time and under budget. Money wins every time. Every time. If you do the secure thing or do the cheap thing, it's almost always going to be the cheap thing. When people make exceptions, it's because they think it'll be expensive later. Right? Outcomes are too late. Quality control is too late to do security. It needs to be part of the whole socio-technical system of developing software. Quality control also focuses on verification, not validation. And this is a thing that I see quality assurance teams and security teams and engineering teams and everybody involved often confuse. Verification answers one very important question. Did we build it to spec? Does it meet the requirements that we set out at the beginning? That's great. That's what security testing tools do for you. They help you verify your code. We're going to set policy that says no SQL injection, and we can test it. We can say, yep, we have a high confidence. We have no SQL injection because our tools tell us so. Tools might be wrong, by the way, but hopefully not too wrong. But you'd never know that because you're just measuring outcomes. Validation, which is what quality assurance does. It does verification too. That's an important part. But it also does validation, which is answering the question, did we build the right thing? Were our requirements reasonable? Were they correct? And a great example of where the difference in these causes security problems is, I'll see things where like, well, okay, we have a cross-site scripting flaw. We need to fix the cross-site scripting flaw. Okay, cool. We'll run it through an escaper, and we're done, right? No more cross-site scripting flaw. Good job, everyone. Go have a beer. You earned it. And what no one thought to address was, why were we trusting user input at all in this circumstance? That shouldn't have ever come from a user. The user input isn't appropriate here in the first place. So why did we allow it? Well, it's a narrow circumstance. I've seen things with SQL injection where, we closed the SQL injection flaw, and then when there was a manual code review done, the question was asked, why are you using a database to do multiplication? Right? It shouldn't have been SQL in the first place. And we missed that weakness because we were so focused on, we made the little light in the tool turn green. We didn't validate that our requirement was the requirement we actually wanted. So what do we do now? 3 simple things. Embrace uniqueness in your people and in your applications. Rather than trying to boil your entire application security footprint down to one risk item, understand everybody's going to be different. Put the people first. Give them a seat at the table. Understand that people doing the right thing is important. Do real education. And then focus on building an assurance program rather than a control program. And try not to call control assurance. It just confuses everything. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any answers? Excellent. Thank you very much.